Hello, everyone. So tonight what I would like to do is I would like to go over the OA process so you guys have a good understanding of what this process looks like and how it affects you as a student, as well as briefly go over the prompt and some tips to help get you through this unit. So the very first thing that I want to start with is the OA process. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen with you here. Okay, and let's see, we want to get into here, the slideshow. I'm not going to read everything off of this because that would take forever. I know your guys' time is valuable. So I'm just going to go through some of the important points here. What is the outcomes assessment? It's basically the process that we use to determine whether you are meeting the course outcomes or not, right? Are you able to demonstrate that you've learned the skills that you need in order to move on to the next class? And what we do is we give everyone in 101 the same prompt. You guys all write the same essay with the same sources. And you demonstrate that you have met these outcomes in a 4 to 6 page paper, okay, not counting the works cited. Okay, so it's taught just like every other essay that we do in this class, and it's graded just like every other essay. We're still going to do peer review. You're still going to be working with a tutor. You're still going to be working with me. The only difference is that you only get one draft of this. So usually, I would grade a paper and then you get the opportunity to revise. For this paper, you don't get that. So that's really the only key difference with this paper. But I will be working with you throughout the entire writing process. So try not to freak out about not being able to revise, right? We're going to try to get you a good solid draft by the time we have to turn these in a few weeks. Okay, why the OA? Again, that's just to make sure that you are meeting the outcomes, that we're staying consistent, and it helps us to make sure that we're improving our class and our curriculum and things like that. Okay, how does the OA process work? What will end up happening is I will be the first one to grade your essay. So when you turn in your finished draft, I'll look at it, I'll grade it, and you will be either given a P for pass or NP for no pass. Okay, anyone that gets a pass means that you have met the outcomes of this assignment and this course, right? You've gained the skills that you need. You automatically receive a letter grade in the class. If you receive a no pass, two things can happen. Okay, the first thing that happens when you get a no pass is that you could potentially go to portfolio review, right? The way for you to go to portfolio review is that if essays 1 through 3 are all passing and the OA is the only one that's not passing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to collect all of your essays, send it to another group of English 101 instructors, and they will determine whether all of your collective essays are good enough to pass the class. And usually if all of your other essays are passing, you're going to pass the class. Okay, so just to alleviate some of your worries there, as long as units 1 through 3 are passing, you should be good to go. Okay, if you have an NP, so second scenario, if you have an NP and maybe 1 or 2 of your essays are currently not passing, right? You haven't revised them to a passing grade yet, or maybe you've revised several times and it's still not passing. In that case, you will not go to portfolio review, and instead you will be given an NC, a no credit for the class. Okay, when you're given a no credit, it does not affect your GPA, but what it does do is that it requires you to retake English 101. Okay, so basically what we're trying to say here is your goal is to get a pass, right? Or if you're on that borderline, you have a no pass, you need to make sure that all 3 of your other essays are passing. Okay, as long as all 3 of your other essays are passing, you should be good to go. Okay, for a portfolio review, you should pass that and you would get a letter grade for the class. Okay. So again, I kind of just went through that. How does it impact your grade? I also just went over that. Again, if you get a pass, you get a letter grade. If you get a no pass, go to portfolio review and pass, you get a letter grade. If you do not pass, you get a no credit. Okay. Some of the top reasons for people not passing the OA, usually it is because it's too short, right? You need to have at least 4 full pages. That make sure that we have enough content to go off of. If it's usually less than that, it's not enough for us to assess whether you've met the outcomes or not. Lack of organization, right? If you're not using P's, if your ideas are all over the place, usually you would not pass for that reason. Problematic source use. So if the sources that you're using aren't really used as evidence and they're like not supporting your argument in any way, or you're not doing a good job of like citing your sources or giving credit to your sources, those things would be problematic and probably lead to a no pass. Reliance on narrative or summary. Remember that argumentative writing, you really want to make a point, provide evidence, analyze that evidence, and tell us how it relates to your overall argument. So if you're just telling a story or you're just summarizing what other sources are saying without any kind of argumentative tone to it, that would be a reason to fail. Or if you're just not taking your audience into consideration. For example, a prompt a few years ago talked about working mothers, single working mothers, and a student had written something about that, you know, women's place were in the kitchen, barefoot, cooking for the family. And obviously, you know, most English instructors are women, so that would be really poor audience awareness, right? That's probably going to not fare well with your audience. So make sure that you are thinking about who your audience is, what their values are, right? Use that rhetorical sensitivity. Okay, know who your audience is. And in this case, it's English 101 instructors. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're writing. Okay, if you have any questions about this, let me know. I'd be happy to answer them. But for this unit, just try to treat it like one of our normal essays, okay? Try not to overly stress about this. Again, as long as you have all of your other essays passing, you should be all right, okay? So try not to, you know, overwhelm yourself with this. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and look at our OA prompt. Most of you guys should probably have already looked at this just because we've already started our OA note process, right? Very similar to our positivity essay where you're going to write a thesis-driven analytical and argumentative essay. Okay, if you look here on the prompt, you'll actually see that they give you some sample theses that you can look at and possibly use, right? You're going to have to argue whether facial recognition technology is beneficial or problematic, and you can't just be like, oh, it's beneficial, right? That's too broad. You need to narrow your scope to a specific context, right? It's beneficial for these, like this group of people or for this purpose, or it's harmful to this group of people or for this purpose, right? Be specific in what you're talking about for whether it's harmful or helpful. And we'll talk about different ways to organize that, right? Where you're still gonna have the option to do like problem solution, straight argument, you can do cause and effect, right? I'll give you a handout with a bunch of different ways that you could set this up. Okay, but I think it's really good to keep these ideas that they present here in mind because these were made with the sources in mind. For example, in OA Notes 1, you saw at least 2 sources that had to do with how it can be problematic for schools, right? Which kind of fits with this narrative here. So start thinking about which direction that you want to take your paper with, and then start, you know, choosing your sources based off of that. Okay, that will help bring your argument together more quickly. Same formatting, length, and source citation requirements as our positivity. The only difference here, you will have to cite 2 sources, but for this one, you need to have at least 6 total in-text citations. For positivity, I think you only needed to have 4. Okay, so make sure you are using the evidence from the sources to support your argument, right? Use those piece paragraphs. Okay, it needs to be at least 4 full pages. Not including the works cited. It needs to be in MLA format. Again, write thesis-driven analytical essay, demonstrate rhetorical awareness, evaluate, analyze, synthesize, right? These are all of our course objectives, right? So you need to be able to do all of things to show that you have met our course outcomes. Okay, again, these are all of our sources. We're currently going through these. We went through the first 4 last night. Tomorrow you'll be going through the next 4. In order to organize your argument early on, right, so that you don't, a lot of you mentioned in your check-in that you were having to cycle back through all of the sources for the positivity to help you find evidence. It's important that you take good notes on these the first time around. Okay, with these OA notes, make sure that you are identifying potential evidence now to save yourself time in the long run. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this chart here to help you kind of organize your information to make sure you're keeping track of all of your sources. So whenever you're using a source, kind of just type in some notes here, right? Put in whatever the source name is, that way you can find it easily, kind of what argument they're making. For example, again, 2 of those sources were about the negatives of the facial recognition technology, particularly to students, right? So you could identify that here and then bring up some of the compelling evidence that they used here, right? How was it problematic for those students? That way you can pull just straight from this document and insert right into your paper when you need to. You don't have to cycle back through all of those sources. This will save you a lot of time. You can just copy and paste straight from the sources in here, make sure, put them in quotes to let them know that they're direct quotes. And you can, either use direct quotes in your paper, or you can use summary and paraphrasing. You should be using the combination of all 3. So I'm going to attach this. I highly recommend it to keep track of all of your sources as you go through these. Okay, another thing that I want you to pay attention to, and probably particularly to this when you're pulling that evidence, make sure that you are building your argument around the evidence and not trying to fit the evidence into your narrative. Okay, it is when you are working with limited sources like this, when sources are chosen for you and you can't do outside research, it's much easier to build around the evidence than it is to try to find pieces of evidence within the sources that match your argument. So see what the sources are saying first, right? In the piece paragraph, start with that evidence and then build around that, right? So what does this evidence show? Oh, it's showing that facial recognition technology is problematic for students with disabilities, right? And then provide that evidence, what's one of the problems with that, identify that, and then talk about it. Right, and build around the evidence first. So that's another suggestion that I would give for this. Okay, so again, we're going to be going through our OA notes for the next through the next week. I believe by next week you're going to have to identify your thesis for me, and then in about 2 weeks, so I guess it's a week and a half, you will need to start working on an outline. So my recommendation would be to start working on your outline now as you're going through these sources, right? Again, try to identify a potential thesis that you're interested in, that you would like to go in that direction. You don't have to identify it till next week, but if you can identify it now, do that. And start piecing the puzzle together now. It'll save you a ton of time in the long run. Okay, so that's pretty much all I have for today. Just again, if you have any questions about this or want to go over this further, I'd be more than happy to help. For this unit, another couple things that I want to touch on. You will be required to work with a tutor. Again, a lot of you talked about how beneficial that is. So know that you're going to have to do that again, so be prepared to do that. Know that I am also available to you. I can help you with your outline. I can help you with developing your organization. I can look at your rough draft. Right, I'm at your disposal. Use me if you have questions, if you need help. Just all you have to do is send an email, and I'm willing to help. And the last thing, I know a lot of people were kind of surprised with the checklist for the positivity checklist, you're going to have a checklist for the OA too, and it's pretty identical. So you can even go to, I think it's week 13 when this is due, and you can pull that checklist up now, and I'll attach it in the announcement as well, so that you are kind of building your essay around that too, so that you don't have to make last minute changes. Okay, so again, any questions, let me know. Have a good night, everyone.